Space Jam. Perhaps one of the most bizarre movies to have been made in the 1990s, was nonetheless a box office hit and has gained a major cult following. However, nobody has ever called it the best movie ever made, and has even gained a reputation as a major guilty pleasure movie in several circles. And because of that, many liked the idea of it finally getting a sequel, which was ultimately released in 2021, a full 25 years after the original. But not only did it get pretty bad reviews, but its box office was rather disappointing even by pandemic standards. And this would lead many to ask, what did the first movie get right that the sequel didn't? And today, that's exactly what I'd like to discuss. And before we get started, I'd just like to warn you that there will be spoilers ahead for both movies. So if you don't want to know anything about either movie, you should probably come back to this video another day. This is the only time you will be warned. Okay, so with all of that being said, what the original Space Jam did right that A New Legacy didn't was that it didn't take itself seriously. In fact, that might have even been the first movie's saving grace. Think about it. It was a Looney Tunes movie where they have to team up with former NBA player Michael Jordan in order to defeat aliens in a basketball game. You couldn't get a seemingly more random concept if you just picked words out of a hat and did a movie based off whatever you pulled out. Though, if you know the history behind the movie, it makes more sense why it got made, but that doesn't change the fact that it was an absurd concept. And what heavily worked to its advantage was that the writers understood that. They knew exactly what kind of movie they were making and made absolutely no pretenses about it. They literally have Bill Murray show up out of nowhere so he can help at the climax, and then he openly admits that he has no place in the story. Other than maybe the minor subplot of the basketball players losing their talents, this movie is almost never serious and instead plays its premise and absurdity for all it's worth. And that's why, especially for non Looney Tunes fans, it's enjoyable to watch. It's pure camp, and it knows it. And for Looney Tunes fans, well, it may not be the most faithful representation of the characters ever, but it's still a fun ride. Now, contrast this with the sequel. Though it still heavily plays the comedy angle, as you would expect something involving the Looney Tunes to, the problem is that the movie takes itself way too seriously. It tries to tell a genuine father-son story in a movie where LeBron James teams up with Bugs Bunny to stop an evil algorithm. So as a result, the emotional moments just don't land. Not at all. Because here's the thing. Even putting the weird plot aside, who goes to a Looney Tunes movie for the drama? Looney Tunes is one of the most famous slapstick cartoons ever produced. So if there's a movie starring them, that's obviously why people are going to see it. Looney Tunes never was, nor was it ever intended to be, anything resembling a Shakespearean tragedy. And listen, I do get that a feature-length movie is different from a 7-minute short, and you are going to want to inject some genuine emotion into it. But if you ask me, this movie way overdid it, and that both Space Jam and Looney Tunes Back in Action did it much better in that regard. Because you know a movie's doing something wrong whenever an emotional moment comes, you're just waiting for it to end instead of being genuinely invested. And tying into that, something that's actually brought up in the movie is that LeBron James is suppressing the Looney Tunes slapstick instincts. And it's only once they embrace it that things start to turn in their favor. And the thing is, had that been the main focus, that could have actually made for a genuinely dramatic Looney Tunes movie. To have Cartoons, whose natural inclination it is to be funny and engage in physical comedy, be forced to behave more like regular people and see how they would react to making such a change before finally embracing who they truly are. But instead, that's only brought up in one scene to demonstrate how LeBron James' control freak tendencies are a problem and is never mentioned again. So instead of maybe going with that angle for all it was worth, they squandered it on a father son plot that simply does not work or fit in a Looney Tunes movie. And this even comes down to how the respective actors play their roles. Now, nobody's ever accused Michael Jordan of being a great actor, or even a good one, but if you ask me, his performance works within the movie specifically because of the type of movie it is. In any other movie, his acting would be criticized all over the place, but in a campy movie made just for fun and basketball, his acting fits in perfectly. He's not trying to make the audience cry. He's not trying to give the performance of his life. He knows exactly what kind of movie he's in and is just trying to be a likable version of himself. And I think anybody would agree that he succeeds in that regard. Now, again, his acting may be a bit wooden, but in this case, it almost adds to the movie's charm rather than takes away from it, specifically because it's that kind of movie and it knows it. Now, in contrast, LeBron James is trying to give a real actor's performance with a real emotional story behind it, and he was criticized all over the place and won a Razzie for his troubles. That, right there, might just be proof enough of where the sequel had gone wrong, and what made the original enjoyable in the first place. But it isn't just that either. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the only other thing besides the fun that the first movie was trying to be was also a genuine basketball movie. And you've got to admit, it certainly dedicates enough time to it. Practically the last 30 minutes are the final basketball game, and even if there are breaks and funny moments, it's still exactly what you'd expect from a game involving Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes. To what extent you could expect such a thing to look like, that is. In A New Legacy, however, it's all about the story. Seriously, the basketball game, which must take up close to an hour of the movie, has only about 5 minutes dedicated to actual basketball. And if I can just inject my own opinion in here for a second, that was probably one of the most frustrating parts for me. It's like you're waiting for a few solid minutes of gameplay, and it just never comes. After only one or two shots, something always comes in and interrupts it, be it an emotional moment that doesn't work or them discussing strategies. And like I said, what made the original fun was that it was a campy sports movie. And as I've already gone over, none of that is present in the sequel. It was like they were trying to take Pixar storytelling techniques and inject them into a Looney Tunes movie. Now, I don't think I even have to say it, but Pixar and Looney Tunes most definitely do not mix, especially on a tonal level. And I believe this movie is the perfect example of why trying to combine the two is not a good idea. Now, interestingly, both movies have also been accused of just being feature-length commercials, but even there, the original did it better. Because, as I've said, it's not trying to hide the fact and is completely shameless about it, even, which is what makes those aspects of it tolerable or even fun to watch. Now, as for the sequel, HBO Max, the movie, may have just been an appropriate alternate title for it. Now, to be completely fair, it was funny at first. You know, seeing Roadrunner and Coyote in Fury Road, Elmer Fudd and Austin Powers, or Daffy sabotaging a train in order to look like a hero. Those early scenes did actually work pretty well. But then they majorly overdid it. I mean, did every Warner Brothers character in existence have to be in the background of the final game for no other reason than just to be there? Now, there's being what the first one was, and then there was this. Because in addition to trying to play an extremely shameless plug completely straight, it's genuinely distracting. People could easily start looking in the background trying to see how many familiar faces they can spot rather than focus on the movie itself. Though, as a lifelong Looney Tunes fan, I have to admit it was a bit flattering seeing the Looney Tunes characters be treated as being perhaps the most significant characters of anything in Warner Brothers' library. But even I know that's pretty much because it was their movie. So, of course, they were going to have the biggest role, regardless of where they actually stand on the Warner Brothers tier. Okay, so to sum it all up, everything the sequel gets wrong that the original didn't boils down to the fact that it was being way too serious, while the original actively embraced what it was. Every problem I've just listed, and I'm sure some I haven't mentioned, tie back to that. In fact, I'd say about the only thing a new legacy gets even half right, like the original, is the humor, especially when it comes to the Looney Tunes themselves. And this guy, LeBron James, agent harassers. Seriously, could we get a spin off with him alongside the Looney Tunes at some point? Because that would make for a really hilarious movie. But joking aside, the sequel failed to live up to the original because it made the fatal mistake of not understanding why the first one worked. But to be fair, it's not the worst movie ever made, and if somebody's ever in the mood for a good campy live action animated sports hybrid movie, there's still the original. And at the very least, maybe this movie could serve as a good cautionary tale of how understanding why a movie works is the key component to trying to duplicate it and make it work again. And that sometimes it's better to just admit what your movie is and have fun with it rather than trying to force a serious story into a movie it clearly wasn't meant for, especially when the lead characters are somebody like the Looney Tunes. Okay, I think I've made my point. So now it's your turn to tell me. Do you believe that the saving grace of the original Space Jam was that it didn't take itself seriously, and that the sequel suffered from doing just that? Or do you believe I've got everything backwards and am wrong about everything I just said? Please feel free to tell me in the comments. And remember, you are free to disagree with everything I said if you want. You are free to have your own opinion on anything we talk about. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.